Hey everybody, I'm Scotty J. Welcome to Rock Titan Live. And I got to tell you, folks, I don't always get so giddy about the guests that we have on our show, but when we have an icon like the one I have with us right now, it's hard not to get just a little bit excited. I am a child of the 80s, and if you are a child of the 80s like I am, there is absolutely no chance, unless you were living in solitary confinement without today's technology, that you wouldn't know who this next guest of mine is. Ladies and gentlemen, I have got Jack Hues, and you know him as the voice of Wang Chung with us right now from England. Mr. Hughes, how are you?
I'm pretty good in the circumstances. Very good.
Right. So we were just kind of talking about things, and in the course of both our lifetimes, I don't know that any of us have seen anything like this coronavirus pandemic that's going on right now. Just so
Mm.
all of your fans can feel comforted that you are okay. I'm
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
presuming you
I'm
are okay.
I'm good. I'm living in isolation here in my house in Canterbury, which is about 60 miles southeast of London.
Okay.
So it's pretty well. It's incredibly quiet here. It's quiet most of the time, but it's really quiet at the moment.
Right. And now, before we talk a little bit about, Wang Chung and the various projects that you've worked on over the years and things of that nature, you just finally, after all these years, launched your very first solo album, which I actually find that a little hard to believe. PRIMITIF. It just came out just a little while ago, but I guess as the old adage goes, better late than never, huh?
Yeah. No, I took my time. I mean, yes, people say, why now? And that's a hard question to answer. But I just had a lot to say right now, and I had a lot of time on my hands to say it. So out came this double solo album.
Yeah, and of course, you release this album, you want to support it, and there's a lot of media, that it always encompasses something like this, and then we get an act of God, a
Yeah.
natural disaster, it's like, oh, come on, finally, all these years, yeah, I finally put out this, double album, like you said.
Yeah.
And it might be maybe a little challenging to support it right now. But again, we are all practicing social distancing. And I know artists from around the globe are doing things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Um, just because Primitive literally just came out last week to the public.
Yeah.
Have you thought about how you might be doing certain things to share this new music with your fans?
Yeah. Well, initially, we were planning just a one-off gig here in Canterbury. There's a lovely theatre here,
Hmm.
and we had that booked, and we had people invited, and we were going to launch the album like the day after release. Obviously, that got cancelled. So we're now sort of thinking, well, we'll leave it 3, 4, 5 months. I don't know how this is long as this is going to take, and we'll just sort of pick up once things start to get back to normal. And in a way, looking at it as positively as I can, people have a few months to listen to the record, to get used to it, and obviously the access to the record is through the usual channels, Spotify and all the digital stuff, as well as being able to actually physically purchase it, or purchase it physically. And yeah, so maybe people will get to know the record. Maybe agents will listen to it and go, "Wow, we need to tour this record," And so it might actually build a little bit of traction, and perhaps there'll be some bigger opportunities than initially presented themselves.
Right on, right on. Now, again, as I introduced you, and everybody, again, Mr. Jack Hues, Wang Chung, everybody, Wang Chung tonight, dance hall days. I mean, oh my God, it's so funny. I've got three younger children, and I was just curious, just to see how much that music you did with Wang Chung has survived the test of time. Because again, it was so iconic. There's no chance that you go back and look at any kind of 80s montage where
Yeah,
you're not featured. I mean,
yeah,
it's just, yeah, it's not possible. So I played some of your big hits,
yeah.
for my kids. I'm like, you guys ever heard this before? Like, oh yeah, like, they totally knew who you were,
That's
and
great.
oh yeah, yeah, and it's wild. Um,
Yeah.
Now that being said, like you just touched on, that it's been a long time coming
Mm.
from where you had all your music with Wang Chung and your various other collaborations and different projects that you had, but just now you put out your first solo album.
Hmm.
I guess first off, have you been thinking about this, for much longer than it actually took for you to produce the material off this album? And why so long?
Mm. It's hard to say. I mean, because obviously there's no simple answer to that. I guess in the last 5-10 years, I've been working with local musicians here in Canterbury. So with the 80s, I had I lived in the UK all the time, but I had a record deal in Los Angeles with Geffen Records. So I spent a lot of my time in LA, and the whole thing was global, international stuff, which was great. But I think the tenor of these times, and I'm talking pre-COVID times, with my jazz sort of projects, and I call it jazz for want of a better word, really. It's very much working with local guys and local levels and engaging with local musicians, local bands, local venues, because that's where that music is. It's at the sort of grassroots, if you like, And I guess, I was working to begin with, say, back in 2006, I released an album with my dear friend Chris Hues producing. Chris produced Dance All Days, but Chris is a sort of into, what should we say, recondite music, and he does all sorts of interesting projects on his own label. And I guess I just got to this point where in 2012, something like that, I did an album called A Thesis on the Ballad, where I set some poetry by this amazing poet called Kelvin Corcoran and wrote these sort of 6 songs in a very short time frame. And that sort of took me back to writing songs again, And so I was toying with the idea of songs and so on, And then suddenly, in sort of late 2017, various things happened in my life, and there was this big outpouring of poetry initially, and that poetry I then sort of set to music. So I was sort of consciously following what I'd done with my jazz projects, So not writing just straight verse chorus song, but trying to kind of create music out of the poetry. But I wanted it to be accessible. I didn't want it to be file under jazz. And I was thinking in terms of rock bands and stuff, So I could, although I started all the recordings in my house using program drums, I imagined what the drummer would be like. And he was the drummer in Siddhartha, who's a band that I've worked with quite a lot on and off. They're Canterbury based. And Josh eventually played real drums on the whole record. And so it sort of evolved. But I guess my long-winded way of speaking is around using local musicians, creating an album that's sort of based geographically in one place.
Yeah, right on, right on. Now, one thing I couldn't help but notice, Jack, your voice. It's timeless. I mean, it really, just listening to your recordings, and I'm not familiar with the recording process. I've never sat down and actually listened to an artist record something all the way through. So I'm sure there's some starts and stops and things of that nature, but you really sound amazing. And I'm not just, blowing smoke. Is there anything specific that you've had to do over the years to preserve your voice? Because you do hear some artists from back in the day, they just don't sound the same way now that they did then. They're playing their songs, they're singing their songs, but it's just kind of like, ooh. That has not happened with you.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate, and it's probably because I haven't done that much like live performing and stuff. I guess because I thought of myself as a writer a lot, rather than a performer. I think if you're out there on the road really banging it, then your voice is going to get shot. I bought recently Dylan's Rolling Thunder Review, the sort of big box set of like about, I think, about 7 or 8 of the performances like complete. And much as I love Dylan and I love that period of his work and the songs, he's shouting his way through every one of those songs, and you think, man, that's where your voice got shot, and why it sounds like it does now. And I mean, I've got a lot of time for how he sounds now as well, but it takes a toll.
A lack of abuse, I would imagine, is key,
Yeah.
That and the lack of abuse of other excesses and things of that nature, which I know some people do. It's like, there are things you're supposed to do and not do, as a vocalist.
Yeah.
And one of which is not talk to me. It's like, I can't talk before the show. I gotta save my voice.
Yeah, that's true as well, actually. I've had those experiences where people really want to rap away, and you've got to save it.
Well, with PRIMITIF, one of the things that really got my attention right off the bat, was the first song right off that album, "Look of Love." What a
Yeah.
classic! Burt
Mm,
Bacharach
yeah.
and Miss Dusty Springfield.
Mm,
What made you
great.
What made you choose that song?
Well, there was a very personal, specific reason, but removing past that, uh,
Ah, all right, all
when
right.
I was a kid, um, my father was a jazz saxophone player, and he had a dance band, and he used to play in the town where I grew up in Gillingham, which is about 30 miles from here, up the road. And there was this old dance hall days maybe, which was just like sort of like it was in the 40s, 50s, and he was playing there with his band. And when I was 13, 14. He encouraged me to come and play with him, play bass and stuff like bass guitar. So I used to sort of stand. He gave me the music, and I was learning to sight read in those days, and I sort of could do it, but I used to have to watch the keyboard players. I can never tell left from right. I think that's left, isn't it? Yeah, that hand, and follow the bass parts and stuff. And a lot of the music I found, not so great because I thought I knew everything at 13 and loved the Beatles and everything. But one of the songs I adored was "The Look of Love." And I used to play that, and I sort of there's something about the bass part of it, these sort of pedal chords, the D-7, the whole sort of thing about it that I just adored. And so when it came with this album, I'd sort of done this demo version of "The Look of Love," and I just got into this sense of playing the song, and then in this kind of trauma of "Don't ever go, I love you so," and all that stuff, thinking, right, the music's just going to go vroom, and then left turn, right turn, left turn, and so out that you wouldn't know where you were, and that will be this sort of portal into this other music that I would then write. And that's kind of how it is on the album. And that's why it's the first track, because a lot of people said to me, "Oh, why do you do that? Why, your songs are really good. Have that as one of the first tracks." And it's kind of like, no, it's not because my songs are better or worse. It's just because that song has to be your way in.
Right. Well, no, I love the rendition you put on it. And, it is a song that's been covered by some other notable artists. I know one of which was Vanilla Fudge.
Okay.
They put a different spin on it. Our friend Carmine Appice, who's the drummer for Vanilla Fudge, started Vanilla Fudge. I thought it was very interesting. I always love hearing, how you as a musician, as an artist, can take a work and really own it and make it your own. I have a lot of respect for that, because I think in a lot of regards, it takes just as much work to do that, as it does to write the song in the first place, to really kind of modify the mood, the melody and things of that nature. So I thought that was very interesting. And, that being said, I was just looking over some of the influences that you had for PRIMITIF. And again, everybody, just so you know, I am here with Jack Hues of Wang Chung, and we're talking about his brand new album, PRIMITIF, which has been a long time in the making, and it's absolutely incredible. So make sure you go check it out, go buy it, go it on Amazon, go on his website, Jack Hues, and it's pretty incredible. One of the very interesting influences that you had mentioned for some of this new work that you did got my immediate attention, only because one of the artists is like my wife's hall pass. Are you familiar with the term hall pass and what a hall pass means?
I'm not sure, no.
If you were going to leave your significant other, if you were just going to go gallivant, and it's kind of
Okay.
like your get out of jail card,
Okay.
That's
Got it.
that's a hall pass, and I am referring to one Miss Lana Del Rey,
Right.
and you got video games
Yeah.
on this album,
Yeah.
which I love, and it's funny because I had to play it for my wife, and I'm like, listen to this song, you got to hear this, and
Right.
she's listening, she's like, who is that? What is this? What am I listening to? And I'm like, are you serious? Are you
Yeah.
serious right now? I'm like, this is like a woman you're going to leave for me, okay? If she came knocking on the front door right now and it was Lana Del Rey, I'm done. I'm gone. Forget about it. I'm in a place beyond the doghouse.
Yeah.
Some of these influences that you had, that one really struck me just because, she's a young up-and-comer. Did you actually collaborate with Lana on that song at all?
No.
Or no?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
All
No, I
right.
mean, I just love that first record she did, and I love that track. Heard it as a single, like on the radio kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, I adored everything about the way she did it, her voice, that kind of Twin Peaksy David Lynch persona that she adapted for that record,
Yeah.
And and I periodically get obsessed with songs. That's a song that I got obsessed with, and I just start playing it and singing it and messing around with it. And I guess with the frame of mind I was in, there was the stuff about that song that's very beautiful, like especially the verse chords and just the kind of way it sits there. And I really, for whatever reason, and with all due respect to Lana, Miss Del Rey, I should probably call her, I wanted to kick all that in the trash, basically, and just do this kind of really kind of version of it. And I just got into this sense of the long intro, and it just going on for a long time before anything happens, and vocally, that is. And then the idea that the vocal would just kind of come in, but still not dominate the song. It would just be like a line, and the song would just keep on with this grinding kind of riff, And then after a while, that would evaporate, and you get that beautiful chorus, and then back. So I just had this sort of vision of something much tougher and a bit more desperate in a way, and less stylized, because the song is just so amazing. It can go so many different ways.
Yeah, right on. Well, not for nothing, Jack, but I'll tell you what, I know she's done some collaborations with other artists, with songs that, she's covered herself, like Chris Isaac and whatnot. Oh my God, to hear you and Lana together, like doing that song, oh man, I'll tell you what, you got to get a hold of her people. That would be just the combination of your voice and her voice and your guitar playing. Oh my God. Maybe if she played a little bit of piano, that would be very cool.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we could do that.
Oh, yeah, that would be something. But there is a very dominant theme of love on this album. And also I noticed something very interesting with some of the song titles. You literally cover every single season of the year.
Yeah.
Autumn, spring, summer, winter.
Yeah.
Where did that inspiration come from?
Well, I started thinking, when I started writing it, I think the first song I wrote was Whitstable Beach.
Yes.
And, and then it sort of like evolved, and I wrote, I guess, sort of 6 or 7 songs, and I played it to a few people, and they were like, wow, this is really cool, And then I sort of came up with a few more things, and I had like a sort of an album and a half, I suppose, And I started thinking all the way I write songs tends to be very dense and focused. And I thought what I need to do is write some instrumental pieces that would just fit in between some of the bigger songs and break it up a bit. So I started working on those. And again, I sort of initially was intending them to be quite calm and relaxed, but because of whatever I was in at the time, they're all really intense as well, But I just there's a song called Winter, which I guess the shape of the album, if you think about it as a vinyl thing, it's a double vinyl album, with side 1, 2, 3, and 4. So side 1 is kind of like the look of love, and then this kind of statement of where I'm at, and then side 2 gets very dark about the love, this relationship, and the idea of loss, and so on. And Winter is the sort of beginning of this very sort of dark journey, and then side 3 begins with You Are the One I Love, and everything sort of brightens up. And I just wanted to sort of have this sense of winter into spring on side 2, into summer on side 3, and into autumn on side 4. So you get this sort of sense of a cycle of stuff happening that takes you back to the beginning, and that just seemed sort of important to me as a way of expressing, because it's not just about loss and relationships, it's also about just the sort of cyclic nature of an album and the songs that it contains.
Interesting. Now I'm just curious, in the course of making this album, did you discover anything new about yourself?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? Yeah. I guess a lot of the impetus came from a sense of confidence, and that came from being probably on my own, really, in a profound sort of way, for the first time in my life. Because I think I grew up in a very nice family sort of thing, and not without its stuff, because all families have that stuff. And then I had my kids very young. I got married very young, and then I got to my second marriage, and that was, I was when I was 30, when I was having the hit with Dance All Days, I had 3 children at that point.
Wow.
So My life was kind of full tilt from
Yeah, yeah,
and then
just a little bit.
life, sort of, as it were, 30 years later, it's different. My kids are growing up and they're doing their own thing, and they now have families themselves, and I'm in this different place, But I'm still, I guess, as a musician, I'm still learning. Do you know what I mean? I'm still learning what it is to sing and to play guitar and to write songs.
Oh, come on, come
No,
on.
really, because it's like a whole different thing, depending on where you are in your life with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. No, that is very interesting. One thing I'm always very interested about, with songwriters such as yourself, because you've just written so many songs, and I joke with some artists that you've probably written songs that you've thrown away, that you just have completely forgotten about, or songs that you've written that are still on the back burner that have never seen the light of day. But given that PRIMITIF is, like you said, a dual album, but in the case of it being vinyl, you got front and back of two different albums. What made you decide to put it out as, a double album like that versus breaking it up, and putting out, just one LP and then, wait a little bit and then put out another LP?
Yeah, we did think about that, and I say I sort of worked pretty closely with Joel McGill, who's the bass player in Siddhartha, and runs the record label that I've put the record out on Dawn Chorus Recordings. And he sort of said maybe we should do two albums, stagger it. And I can see if he were more of a record company guy, he'd have probably talked me into that, But artistically, I wanted it to be this double album. And I think, again, when I was a kid, the White Album was the Beatles' White Album was a huge influence on me, and not just the music, but the whole way it was delivered, with this mysterious white cover, with the photos, the poster, the stuff. It was like a whole kind of, I don't know what it was really, it's a whole thing that you just got into. And then this music, and the music, it had, I remember reading a review with the remaster thing that came out couple of years ago, and this guy saying, the White Album, it wasn't so much the songs, it was the bits between the songs, these sort of scary voices and bits of like nylon strung guitar and pigs and Revolution 9 and all this stuff. And I thought, it was like when you were 15, 16, which I was when that came out, I didn't know anything about like avant-garde music, the idea that music was like noise or sound, and it kind of confronted me, in a really good way. Do you know what I mean? I just absorbed all that stuff. So that became very much part of how I looked at music. And so when I went to university and studied classical music, for want of a better word, and you come across modern composers like Stockhausen and Luciano Berio and these guys, then what they're doing doesn't seem so strange when you've been brought up with Beatles records, because obviously they were listening to those guys and incorporating some of that stuff into their pop music. So for me, the whole idea of genres and music being in different places is quite foreign, and I hope that PRIMITIF has a lot of these kind of eclectic influences and brings them all together without saying, this is a classical track and this is a jazzy track and this is it's all just in there. And hopefully my identity as an artist holds it all together.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I love how you so successfully managed the departure from the sound you have always had as Wang Chung. I thought that was very interesting. And I know your time is sensitive. I could talk to you all day, Jack. But, I know you've got things to do. It's a little later over there in England, too, versus over here where I am on the East Coast. But I am curious. So obviously you've got PRIMITIF out right now, and everybody, again, go check it out. But some years back, you put out a Wang Chung album in 2012, Taser Up. Yeah. Have there been any thoughts at all to you revisiting that which is Wang Chung and doing any new music there? Or is your focus more on that of being a solo artist and doing more of what you've done with PRIMITIF?
Well, hopefully both. For a while I did we did Taser Up, and that was in the context of starting to, Nick and I working together, because I guess we probably didn't work together as Wang Chung certainly for about 20 years.
Right, yeah.
Then we came back together and we did some of these kind of summer tours, and I think that was okay for a while, but I found that the touring and sort of playing shows where you just do 3 or 4 songs. And inevitably that's the hits. I mean, I'm happy to play Dance All Days to anybody who wants to listen, but I also like to have the opportunity to play other things. And I think it's not so much the gigs, it's everything in between, the travelling, the time it takes, the time that you're sitting around, basically doing nothing, when I could be doing something, So I stepped back from the touring and the Wang Chung-ness, and that's in a way that gave me the space to do PRIMITIF, that sort of 2 years, of working on that. Not that I worked on it continuously, but,
right on.
chunks of time. But right now, I know Nick is very keen to do something else with Wang Chung, and that's sort of a distinct possibility, But it'll be interesting to see what happens with PRIMITIF, and I definitely want to pursue that for a while.
Yeah.
We're going to be putting out the back catalogue, so that's like the 6 albums in remastered editions with lots of outtakes and tracks that didn't work at the time, or rather did work at the time but weren't considered Wang Chung enough, And so it's going to be a very interesting and pretty comprehensive retrospective. So that will come out later this year, I hope, or part of it anyway. And we'll see where we go,
Right.
Open for Wang Chung.
Awesome. Well, I tell you what, Wang Chung, that really was an entity all to itself in a time in and of itself. I mean, again, just being a kid of the 80s, what a great time. I mean, it was just such an explosion of culture. It really was a culture shock. It was so drastic just from going from the 70s into the 80s, where the music, the fashion, the movies, the commercials, the commercialization of everything.
Yes, that's true.
And of course, your music is timeless in and of itself. But then, of course, when it becomes part of movies and soundtracks and TV shows, it really takes on a life of itself there too. And it lives on in that fashion. So that's very, very cool. And Jack, I just want to personally thank you. I want to thank you for your gift of music to myself and to the world. It's awesome and it's inspirational, and I hope you keep doing it for many years to come. And again, over there, please be safe. And everything that's going on. I know this is a very chaotic time, but I can personally say the music off PRIMITIF is very soothing to the soul. And everybody, again, we are here with Jack Hues. You know him from Wang Chung, but you should know him from his newest work, PRIMITIF. Make sure you go check that out. And again, thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Great, Scott. Thanks so much for.
All right, Scotty J with Rock Titan Live.
Great.
We're out.